Alright, so today on the build table we have from Trumpeter 135th HEMTT M983 tractor, which from this point forward I'm just going to refer to as the HEMTT because I don't feel like saying all those letters. Okay, so really excited to be getting into this one. This is a obviously U.S. military vehicle. You know, normally you've seen me do, you know, domestic civilian production stuff. So this is a little change, and like I said, I'm looking forward to this. We do have 380 pieces in this kit, so definitely a step up in complexity. I've built quite a few things like this in the past, but it's been a while since I've gotten into something like this. So should be fun thing to go through and share, and the model looks to be really well detailed. So let's dig in. Okay, so first up, since this is a different manufacturer than I've shown in other videos, we'll look at a few things. First of all, just to show you as far as instructions go, these are really well laid out. We have a sprue map to start with, which is always a convenient thing, especially with these kits that have the higher part counts. Sometimes it's nice to have a little more reference in finding your parts. But as you can see, and as I've said in some of my introductory videos for the channel, you know, if you look at the instructions, it's no different than you would find on any other kit, higher count, lesser count, different subject matter. It doesn't matter. All models follow the same kind of assembly instructions, you know, follow the exploded diagrams and go on. The only difference being because of the higher part count, there is quite a bit going on here. And when you see a page like this, don't be intimidated. It just means you have to take your time a little bit, you know, round up your parts. What I like to do with complicated builds like this, I clip out my parts from the trees, the sprues, I lay them out on the instruction manual, and then clean them up and then begin to assemble them. So this way things don't get lost. If they're parts that have a right hand, left hand orientation, you don't get them mixed up. You just have to remember, you know, not to sneeze on the instructions and send everything flying. So there's a catch to everything. Okay, now this model as well, and this is something fairly common to these 1/35th scale military models in particular. You will notice the doors come separate, but they are not necessarily, well, they are not in fact built as hinged doors. So you can assemble them closed or open. And the reason Trumpeter and almost all the other military model manufacturers that I've seen, they do this for a diorama building. So if you're interested in doing a diorama, you can, you know, you build the truck with the doors open and whatnot, and you know, set up a scene as you choose. Being that I'm not really into doing a diorama, I have yet to figure out exactly what I'm going to do with these doors, open, closed, or I might try to devise a little hinge. We'll see how that goes. And there we go, finished product. So I'm going to put that aside. Now they give you a very nice color painting sheet. We're going to get back to this after we look at the plastic, because I want to talk about painting. You know, it's always a big topic with these military scale models, particularly into the more detailed kits, but that's another part of this segment. So like I said, I'm going to put this aside and we'll come back to it later, and we're going to look at some plastic. Okay, now with this kit we get some really nice clear parts for the various windows in the vehicle. They're hard to see in the bag, but I did take them out and they are crystal clear, which is very nice. You get a few photo etch pieces. When you do photo etch, you have to use a cyanocrylate base glue to attach them to the kit, so that should add a little bit more detail. I didn't take it out of the bag, but trust me, there are all sorts of little decals in here, which you can see the shadows of. The instrument gauges, all the little warning and informational labels in the truck, outside the truck, they're all there, so that's great. I love that, because that will really help give it a realistic look. We get 9 of these really nice tires, molded with Michelin. Now we get 9, it's an 8-wheeled vehicle, but you do get a real tire for the spare as well. So those should look nice. And just to give you an idea, in terms of scale, this is the cab of the truck. Obviously I haven't cleaned it up yet, but all molded in one piece. That's really nice, and the detail on here is pretty impressive, I have to say. So there's that. So let's look at some plastic. We have the interior. Already a lot of detail molded on there, but there will be a lot of additional pieces going in there to create the full interior. So that's nice. To give you an idea of size, this is the one side of the frame. So this frame rail, what do we have? It's about 10 inches long. So the finished kit, I believe the cab sticks out a little bit. It's probably looking about 11 inches for the finished model. So quite a large vehicle. It's longer than most 1/24 scale car models. Obviously, it's a big old truck. But also for reference, this is the rear. This will be the front. And yeah, again, lots of nice detail on there. So we get 2 of those sprues. We get 4 of these for the wheels. You can see the hubs. Some good detail in there, molded right in. Some more frame elements. You're going to start to notice that some of the pieces on this kit are quite small. That goes with the territory. But even so, there are 2 of these, your suspension elements. When you look down at them for the detail, it is quite good, and I don't see a speck of flash on these sprues, so that's nice to see as well. And I see you have a whole load of various suspension parts. You can get some jerry cans, various other tiny little pieces here. I'm not going to try to figure out or identify what all these are. This is just to give you a quick tour of the plastic in the kit. We have our various differentials. This is an 8-wheel drive vehicle. It comes with a fully detailed drivetrain. From some of the other cars and stuff that I've built, that I really appreciate that in the kit, so I'm looking forward to see how that all builds up. Got a nice big fan for our motor. You can see that in there. Radiator, all the good stuff. And then we have on this last sprue, there you can see the doors, very nicely detailed, and then they are already molded with the insides on there. So again, because the driver's compartment is quite detailed on this kit, really going to try to figure out if I could do something with the doors. See a full instrument cluster here, a transfer case, pieces for the motor. See if I can do something to have those doors, at least to take them off so that we can see in there when it's done. Because that's not a lot. There's a lot of stuff in there. I wouldn't want that to be lost by closing it up. Now that we've taken a stroll down sprue lane, let's go back to this painting guide. Now, you can build a kit either in desert camo, which is just the basic khaki, I guess you would call it, or light brown, however you wish. And then we also have on the flip side more of a traditional, I guess this would be more like a NATO style camouflage, for forest and and whatnot. Now, I said I was going to talk a little bit about painting, and what I want to discuss here, and we'll slide this down so we can see the vehicle in profile. Now, you know, I don't have an airbrush. I'm not really interested in doing all this crazy airbrush stuff. You can do masking if you're, you know, very careful and particular with masking with traditional rattle spray cans. You can do a camouflage paint scheme, but it will be a challenge, especially on a vehicle like this where a lot of it is open. If it was a tank, or let's say an armored personnel carrier where you have a pretty solid seamless hull that gives you an even painting surface, here you have a lot of open spaces, so you know, masking is kind of a tricky thing to do. You would have to do it piece by piece, but my main thing with going into a traditional camo scheme like this is, you know, if you look at the idea behind camouflage, it's not just the colors, it's to break up the silhouette or the profile of a vehicle, whatever it may be, and it goes for ships as well. So the idea of the camo is to distract the human eye from the actual geometric shape of the vehicle and distort it or mask it against other things that are there, trees, bushes, whatnot, and that's where the colors come in. You know, your brain is basically a giant geometry engine for spatial relations. That's how we hopefully don't walk into walls. But that's the idea behind camo. And, you know, one of the reasons for me, and, you know, everybody has their own preference and taste, but one of the big things that draws me to build a kit is its overall shape and form. And I would not want to take away from that with, you know, doing a camouflage scheme. So I'll be doing this traditional, I should say traditional, this simpler, what would be a desert camo. So you probably, you know, if this was in Iraq, this is what you would be looking at. That said, remember, if you do something like this, you know, you're not tied into doing these kinds of paint schemes. I'm sure after saying that, there's a bunch of the really fanatic military scale modelers who just started screaming in protest. But you know, it's, again, it's your model, and if you want to build it, like, you know, somebody bought this thing and decided it was going to be their you know, about the town vehicle, and decided to go with a black chassis and a red cab and chrome wheels, whatever, you know, it's go for it. It's your kit, build it the way you want. So, you know, when you watch a lot of the videos that are posted on various channels on YouTube for building these things, it seems like there's almost more time spent on the painting than the building. You know, I, for one, it's the building of a model that really, you know, I find fun and that really attracts me to this hobby. Painting is just to make my assembled product look the best that I can get it to be. That may be an amateurish approach, but it works for me. And since, you know, the goal of all of these videos is to give you a little insight as to how, just with a casual approach to the hobby and relatively straightforward techniques, that you can still end up with something that looks pretty good. So that's the plan. So I'm going to go now and start doing my painting. Going with this scheme also makes life a lot easier, and with the model already molded in basically what would be a pretty neutral gray primer-ish type of color, I'm going to think about how I'm going to get both the tan coat on there and some type of undercoat, maybe with a black primer, so that I don't have to go back and do a lot of black washing. It will hopefully come through right on a two-step spraying process. So we'll see. You know, I'm also not big on doing all these intensive weathering techniques for rust lines, drip lines, all these things. Again, because I'm really more interested in building rather than painting, but I do want it not to look, let me try that again, use some proper English. I don't want it to look toy-ish when it's done. I would rather have it look a little more scale with a little more realism, just not completely beat up and worn down and been through the ringer. So we'll see how all that works out, and when I come back we should have some paint on there. So not much color, but there will be color. Okay, that's it for now. Okay, so here we are, and we have some paint color. All right. Now, I had talked in the prior segment a little bit about the painting, or quite a bit about the painting, but you know, it's one thing to talk, it's another thing to actually have a look at what's going on. So I laid out a little bit here. Of course, I have all the other sprues to the side. They're all painted up as well. But just to talk a little bit about what you can do just with some very simple use of the spray paints and getting different effects. Now, typically, certainly with some of the car models I've done here, you know, when you spray paint, you're looking for a full coat, saturated color, and because that's the way a car would look. But with military vehicle, to give a slight weathering look, you know, it's a little bit of a different story. So the first thing I wanted to show you is how this worked stepwise. So there are 4 sprues of wheels with this kit because it's a truck and it's got a whole lot of wheels and rubber going on. But I saved some of these sprues so that I could show the difference as it goes step from step. And I will move this so you get the clear green background. So this is the original sprue. You know, it comes in this gray molding, and you know, there's really nice molding detail here, as I talked about before. So this is the original sprue. So first step was putting a black primer coat. This is not primer paint per se, it's just flat black. But for this, I looked for full coverage of the original gray plastic, because this black is actually going to be what's going to give us some of the weathering and a little bit of the weathering and shadow effect and whatnot when the final coat goes on. So that's a pretty straightforward spray. You know, you want full coverage, and then that is done. And then the third part is coming in with the final top coat, which in this case I used Tamiya Wood Deck Tan, I believe it's called. I'll have it, you know, listed in the materials underneath the video. But the idea being that when you spray now to put that black undercoat to work, you don't want to do a full saturated coat, and you have to consider what your pieces are and how much color saturation you want on them. So for example, looking into the wheel, there we go, you can see all those nice black shadows in there, and that is the black primer that I did not cover up with the tan paint. Just went in there with a light coat, and now there's no need to go in there and do washes or paint up other details. It's already all taken care of. So that works pretty well. Now, to also show you, this is one of our frame rails. And here, again, it's a little tough to see, but you have all those nice little, come on, focus, there we go. Have all those nice little shadows going on in the creases around some of the bolt heads where some of the metal parts join, and gives it a much more realistic look. Now that is in contrast to some of the pieces on this sprue. Now on here we have fender pieces, we have another piece of the body. I can't tell you exactly where that's going to go, but it's another piece of the body. We have the surrounds for the radiator. Now obviously the radiator itself is going to get some detail, but you can see for these pieces this is now a full saturated color coating, because this on the vehicle would be fully painted. Now mind you, as I had said before, I'm really not big on doing all this weathering and whatnot. I like to build. I like to paint to make my build look good, but I don't like to spend more time painting than building. And I think that's something that a lot of people out there who are getting into this hobby, or actually, do build, they're more for the building part of it than these very labor intensive painting processes. So even here we can still see on the drive shafts, around the differentials, even with a more saturated top coat, that there's still a lot that the black coat underneath brings through to give it depth and texture and really bring out some of the great molding detail on these pieces. So in a way I kind of look at it as, there's a good spray painting job, and then this type of a spray painting job, which you basically, when you do it, say to yourself, all right, I don't really want to do a good spray painting job. I don't want full coverage. I don't want to, get full color saturation. So that's how you'll preserve the work of that black undercoat. And then you're pretty well good. Now some of these pieces, of course, are going to need touch up because they are still all on the sprue, and I'll worry about that as the building goes on as normal. A lot of these pieces, and this was one other thing I wanted to talk about in this segment, there are, when you look at a sprue and how the pieces are molded on the sprue, there are things called gates, which are where the sprue actually comes out to meet the piece. So that little connection, that's called a gate. Now when you cut the piece free from the gate, that leaves what most people refer to as a nub mark, which is the little raw piece of cut area that you now need to whittle down, smooth out, whatever the case may be. One of the things you'll notice with some of the more discerning model manufacturers is they really try to plan where they put the gates and what would then be the resulting nub marks, so that it's not quite so noticeable on the finished product. Which means if you paint like this, where you're doing a whole sprue paint, it makes your life a little bit easier, because even though it may look like, oh wow, I got to cover up all these marks, a good number of those will probably end up being covered by other pieces, or in assemblies, and you won't really see them, or they may in fact end up being places where you are going to be gluing to join other pieces. So something to keep in mind with that. Now on camera, looking at it this way, it's going to be hard to appreciate all this, but when it's all done, there should be a cumulative effect, and it should build up pretty well. And there is quite a bit of building with this because of the higher parts count, so I can't wait to dive in on that. I am in the process of also rebuilding my deck, so I got a lot of things for my hands to do. So it's going to be a little while before I get to this. In fact, I'm down here doing this segment because I got a thunderstorm going by. So had to come in and do something a little bit different. So that's where things are at. And I'll have some JPEGs as moving along through the assembly, and then come back for another update where you get to hear me blah 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 blah. Okay, so until then. Okay, so let's get back to the build. Um, Had to take a little time off from working because, as I mentioned in an earlier segment, I was working on my rebuilding my deck while doing this as well, and unfortunately I had a little drill mishap and took a chunk out of my thumb, and fortunately back in action. But while I had that all wrapped up and bandaged up, wasn't exactly able to do anything here. In fact, I did fling a piece accidentally into nether space, and God knows where it went, so I had to fabricate one. But, you know, that entertainment aside, it's back to business. So I figured this would be a good point to stop and talk about a few things. First, I want to talk about instructions. Now, I had shown in some of the earlier JPEGs before this segment about orientation and watching for subassemblies. And really, even as I really want to point out, despite the parts count of the kit being on the higher side, as I've said multiple times, just follow the steps. It builds like any other model. Part count doesn't really matter. It just means more steps, more pieces, and paying, you know, very close attention to your instructions. And in this particular kit, you can see all the sub-assemblies are nicely labeled, as I had highlighted in the earlier JPEGs again. And also, one thing that is a little curious with these instructions, despite the, you know, overall like real crisp accuracy of the computer generated diagrams, is that sometimes, and again, as I showed in some of the JPEGs, you have orientation switches that may not necessarily be as clearly denoted as you may like. Down here in particular, you will see that you assemble a hub and then it gets flipped around. More notably, I found, as an even better example, now here you see the chassis is oriented front end, rear end, but in the second part of our next part of this step, it's actually now front end, rear end. So the chassis flips direction here, which, you know, is not a big thing if you pay attention to the diagram, and certainly by this point of the build you'll be well acquainted with the details on your chassis. It's just a matter that if they had included just a little diagram, maybe of an arrow showing the spin of the chassis, so that you're a little more aware of that. You know, minor point, but just something I found a little interesting because it's so detailed and exacting with everything else, but then something like that was not there. So, minor quibble, I know, but I thought worthy of pointing out. Now, as far as the actual assembly goes, for all the different pieces, for the smaller size of the 1/35th scale, I have to say, very impressed with the fit of everything. Pieces, you know, line up. The pin marks, you know, they're right on the spot. Things fit together, you know, nice and concise. There's no nice and precisely. There's really no wiggle room or doubt as to, you know, does it really go this way or does it fit quite that way. So it just kind of comes together in a very exacting fashion, and, you know, for something more complex like in a kit like this, that's really to be appreciated, because if there's a little slop in how things go together, that can lead to big problems down the line, as you suddenly find that, oh, this piece is in the way of that, and assemblies don't line up, and you have giant gaps between things, and all sorts of you know, drama shows and horror stories along with those kinds of issues. So, also assembly note, normally I use my trusty Testors cement, But actually with this build I have been using pretty exclusively this Tamiya extra thin cement. This is great, and I will tell you why I've been using it. When looking at the kit as it is at now, and I'll talk a little bit more about where exactly we're at here, but to take a look here, you can see that there are, and this may be a little bit difficult because of the focus ability here, but there are some very small pieces in this kit, and to try to do these with a traditional applicator, as you may have on that Testors cement there, would have made a bit of a mess. Even like these little hooks here, there's a lot of very fine detail represented by some very tiny parts. So because the extra thin is extra thin, it's very good in terms of just applying a dab. It works itself because of the viscosity of the cement. It sucks right into all the pinholes, you know, sunken spots, whatever, where pieces need to fit, and you can just drop them right in. And because it's fast acting, boom, it's in there, and you're pretty well set. It also allows, in some cases, now here on the frame, this is a sub-assembly that sat between the frame rails. So when I assembled the frame, I put the sub-assemblies in there, put it all together, and then I could go back with the extra thin and just run a bead along some of these join lines. During the actual assembly, that would have been awkward because it would have been, you know, a lot of glue sloshing around, and that would just make a mess, and you don't want that. But with it assembled and the fact that it runs into seams, could run a line of the extra thin and it would suck right in there and really add to the strength of the overall assembly. So good thing to note there. Now, getting a little bit closer, we'll start to look at some of the detail here, and it is quite impressive, I have to say. The moldings are great. You know, the moldings are really crisp, and they're loaded with all sorts of detail, as I've mentioned before. But you know, in working with the kit and putting it together, you really start to get an appreciation for that. So at this point, you know, we have a couple of sub-assemblies here. We have one of the fenders with some of the air equipment on it for the engine. This will go on like so, and then we have the fender for the other side. Eventually the spare tire will be sitting on that. That will go on like so. We have the final drive shaft for the engine to the main transmission transfer case, and the engine, which sits in basically like that. Now, in relation to talking about how precisely everything fits, there's an interesting step here which I was a little concerned about in terms of assembling the air cleaner kit, putting it on the fender, and this right here has to key into the turbo on top of the diesel engine. Now, when you have an assembly and an assembly sitting on top of other assemblies, a lot of times getting these things to line up is iffy at best. But with this kit, you know, look at that. It goes right in. So, can't ask for better than that. Last point to mention here in terms of working with the paint treatment I've been doing with this. Now you'll see some rough spots here where I've already scraped down for the attachment points for the fender, but otherwise the shadowing with the black undercoat and the tan overcoat is working out quite well. During the assembly, all I've really had to do is touch up paint where there were cut marks from the sprue, and then we go back, and in some places I would do a little black wash, not black wash, go on with some good old panel liner, and pick up some of the surface detail on like the leaf springs here, some of the attachment points, such as for the shock absorbers, because figure those, those bushings, those attachment points would certainly collect some dirt. Now, again, I'm not building a vehicle that's been all beat up and wrung out, because I don't like to build things that way. So this is going to be a used but gently used, let's say, vehicle. So I'm not looking to, again, completely beat it up. But even with just that simple work, you can see all the nice gradations in color, and adding some highlight to bring out, or low light with the black liner to bring out some of the detail on these pieces. In contrast, the engine, to show you, this is free of any work. This is just raw assembly, and you can see we have some nub marks where I cut it off the sprues. Had to do a little filler here with putty because there was a gap, and obviously the real engine wouldn't have a gap in it. Here's a seam line that I had to clean up. Once I go back and paint, you can see the difference. When I sprayed, I didn't realize I missed part of this, so a little hand paint that'll bring that up, and then when it's all done, I'll go in with that panel liner, and because it's an engine, there's going to be seepage and dirt and whatnot. Add some of that context in there, and I mean some of that detail to add context and contrast to the color and the functionality of what we have here, and it'll be done. So going to get back to assembly. Oh, and by the way, tires. These tires are really nice with their Michelin branding on there. All I did with these, I just sanded the tread a little bit to scuff it up some. A normal tire would not have a shiny tread unless it's, a show car sitting on a showroom floor, which this definitely is not. So I didn't, go crazy beating up the sidewalls or anything like that. Just scuffed up the tread because it's been rolling around doing some duty, and all that stuff is ready to go together. Moving forward, get all this stuff out of the way. See, here we are. This will all go together, and in the next spot we'll be working with the cab, and still haven't figured out exactly what I'm going to do with these doors, but definitely want those to be able to open some way or other, and then more towards final assembly. So gonna get back to work, and I have some JPEGs following with little updates and whatnot, and off we go till next segment. Okay, so we are well into the build with the HEMTT truck here from Trumpeter. Everything is moving along quite well. Now I'm going to stop in here at this point to talk about a few things. Now, in some of the JPEGs prior to this segment, I showed some of the later sub-assemblies which will be going in to complete the model, but I wanted to step in because I had talked earlier about working with the doors and trying to devise some method to have the doors open. So that was plan A. Now, I was actually well into working on this process, and I had looked at some did a little research on the internet and found the way the doors were hinged. Obviously the hinges are molded into the kit, but I wanted to see if there was a retaining strap or anything on the door, because the doors have simple barrel hinges, and yes, indeed, they have well, it's like a nylon strap, so the doors don't swing away when you open them up. So I figured I would use a piece of nylon as the backbone of a hinge restraint, because the doors fit in there pretty well among the hinge pieces, and then the doors would open, and that would be awesome, in a word. However, the important point here was it didn't really work. Reason being, I actually had the hinges fabricated, I had the doors on, and they did open, and everything looked great. However, important point, however, when I test fitted the cab assembly as a whole, and I'll point some of this out in a moment, the cab really didn't fit together anymore. The pieces on this kit, they fit together so well, there was actually no tolerance left. And it brought up an important point, which was to realize that sometimes the best laid plans don't work. So we'll get that out of the way, and I'll talk about why that did not work, and more importantly, concerns you need to have when you decide to start to try modifications or little customization things with these model kits. Not just this one, but pretty much anyone that you would work with. Now, let's take a look at our cab. Now, I showed in the prior JPEGs, the cab really builds up. It's a beautiful, detailed assembly, and yeah, it just really well done piece. And here's our driver's side door. Now, what I was talking about with the hinges, you can see here, this is the side angle of the dashboard. Here is the molding for the hinge. Now, this is flush against the inside of the cab, and it likewise is pretty well flush against the door. So that only left this little vertical run for attaching a hinge, which means half the vertical run of the door really has nothing to anchor it. This top portion here, there's really no space there to grab it, and if we look from the passenger side, you can see there is just that little angle, which is not enough to work with. While part of this challenge was the fact that it's 1/35th scale, so you really don't have a lot of area to work with much of anything, more so than, or actually in conjunction with, the fact that the fit in here, which is so precise and so good, when you want to start fiddling around in some place where everything fits really tight, you will rapidly find there's not only very little room to work, but if you decide to go ahead, and this is finally getting to the point I wanted to make, if you want to go ahead, you're going to have to start doing more and more modification. And whenever you go into doing a modification on a model, it's really important to always consider what you're about to do to alter the model, and if you still have an escape plan to get out of what you're doing if it doesn't work out. Meaning, you don't want to work and work and work and all of a sudden find out, well, not only can I not do the modification I had planned, but now I have marred the model in a way I can no longer repair. And on something, especially in this case, as nice as this, the last thing I wanted to do was end up having it butched. So, what did I do? Well, it was time for Plan B. Forget the hinges. Let's go with LED lights and light it up. So, get rid of that. Props. Now, I will have a series of JPEGs following this segment to talk about, or to show how I went about doing this, because this video is getting a little bit on the long side, this build video, and I don't want it to prolong it any more than necessary. But what you see here now is basically the cab finished with the modifications for adding the LED lights. Now, I went with a 3-light setup, which is very simple. A cab light in here. There we go, the cab light. and then 2 headlights, so those will light up as well. I added a styrene tube. This is from stock styrene down the back of the cab, so to hide the wire. There's the trailing end of it from the cab light. I added these 2 channels to conceal the lights for the headlights, which will then actually be covered by the front armor plate, but just to keep things nice and tidy, I did that. Now the wires come out. There is in the cab, you will notice the center part of the console. This is actually all hollow underneath, and again in the JPEGs I'll show that. So there's a big trough there, and I realized that's a great place to shove all the wires. The battery I mounted in the middle part underneath the cab. There is a space under here between the frame and the body, and then I made a little bracket to hold the switch, and then I made this styrene plate. I just added 2 runners on there to give it a little bit of definition, so it's not just a plain old boring sheet, and stuck that on there. So the wires are concealed. This is all done. Numerous test fits to make sure I had everything ducted properly so it would not interfere with the fit of the cab to the chassis. And now we have illumination. So we'll turn that on, and there we go. So lit up. And now when it's assembled, we'll really be able to see some of this really fantastic cab detail in there, even with the doors on. Now for this LED equipment, if you're interested in doing something like this, a site I used to use to order LEDs no longer carries them, but I found this evandesigns.com, and this is their specialty. There's LED lightings, the light kits, accessories, as it says on their little business card. So the switch gear, the battery attachment, the various LEDs. There are 2 different sizes. These are the pico bulbs, and I have, which is a teeny bit bigger, the nano bulb inside the cabin. So all of that, and it's really not an expensive thing to do. The whole setup I believe was about $10. I did buy an extra switch set, which unfortunately I broke while I was fiddling around, so that one's on me. But point being, it's very inexpensive way to modify a kit, and it does add a real nice effect to it when it's done. Now once this is mounted on the chassis, to turn the lights on and off, I'll just need my handy dandy little jewels screwdriver to reach up there and flick the switch, and that'll be set. And to show you how this will fit in there, once it's on, it's pretty indiscreet, especially when we go ahead and drop in that front armor plate. It just kind of disappears underneath there. So that's one of the other things you want to consider when you do one of these modifications, is that when you're done, it kind of blends in and stays consistent with the overall appearance of the model, because you are looking to improve it, not to detract from it. And particularly on a kit like this, where the detail is so fine and so precise, if you have something that looks a little off, it's really gonna be obvious that you know, it was some add-on type of thing, and you know, that's the last thing you want to do is spoil your appearance. So moving through the assemblies, as I have said before, everything just fits together like 1, 2, 3 on this kit. All the locator pins fit, everything is just spot on. So can't be more satisfied with that than I've been working with it. It's been a long time since I've done anything in 1/35 scale. I built a lot of military models when I was a teenager. I think I had half the Africa Corps on the bookshelves in my bedroom. But you know, I hadn't done one of these in, like I said, a real long time. So it was nice to get back to it, and what a nice way to enter in. So at this point, really, there's just the final assembly, getting all the rest of these sub-assemblies in, a few other little bits and pieces that go in there, decals, and then it's done. Another thing with this that I had not done in a long time was work with photo etch pieces. So I had gone out and I bought myself one of these little folding tools. If you get into photo etch, this was about $17, real handy to have for folding the angles. I also upgraded to a nice set of tweezers. Got a positive tweezers, angle, this, that. These are nice for holding larger pieces. Real handy because there were some very small pieces on this kit, and the little generic tweezer wasn't quite fitting the bill. So, but that all is going together, you know, with that extra little bit quite well. And with any tool, it's always an investment in a future build. So, you know, hey, there you go. You build and you learn. So that's it for now. Like I said, going to move on to the final assembly, and the JPEGs for the modification details with the lights will be following this. And then next time, we'll be back with the final assembly and wrap this one up. Okay, till then. Okay, here we go. After a lot of work, here is the final build review for the Trumpeter HEMTT M983 tractor. Ta-da! And here it is. Okay, so normally during this part, I talk about my overall impressions of the kit, but I'm going to keep that rather brief because I have talked in prior segments about how well the kit went together and how impressive a build it is, which now, you know, picture's worth 1,000 words here. Very happy with the way the kit came out. Like I had said before, and again, I kind of can't stress it enough, how well everything goes together, and, you know, just really great engineering in terms of a kit to build, and the detail is just really top-notch on here. There's really almost more than can really be appreciated on the camera, but that's why I put the larger mirror plate underneath, because there's so much truck it doesn't entirely fit on the turntable. But, and I have the lights on here, which is a little dim inside the cabin because of the contrast with the lights for the filming, but in any event, you can really get a grasp of how much detail there is in this kit. There are a few last minute add-ons I did that I'll get to in a minute, but I just wanted to point out something because I did talk quite a bit about paint scheme and how to approach with the paint, and now that it's all together, can really appreciate and see how that worked out, and I'm pretty happy with it, I have to say. So again, remember I had talked about doing less of a coat on the mechanical elements, which would be, you know, dirtied and a little more used up, even for a lightly used vehicle like I wanted to represent. But flat areas, you know, cab areas, those areas would have a full color saturation. And you can see that we have a nice even coat here for the tan, and then when you get around to some of the detail areas, and hopefully you can make out on the reflection of the underside, the running gear and whatnot, the effect of having the shadows and some of the light black washing I did. For these grates, I did go in and dry brush a little rust color on there, because every time I've seen a military vehicle for real and they have some kind of grate like this, they're always rusted. So I just threw that little detail in. One other thing you may notice is the pneumatic hookup here. I added that in. The kit came with just a mast, but the actual truck has this T assembly here for the pneumatic hookup. Since this is a tractor, you would have a trailer on there and air hookup to run the air brakes on the trailer. You do run a red and a blue hose. So what I did, I took some of my tube stock and I just made a quick hole in it. That gave me my bottom piece and an insert point for the wires. And then out of my sheet styrene, I just cut this angular T-top, a little cyanoacrylate glue. It all went together. And to replicate the hoses themselves, that's actually red and blue ignition wire. I wound it around a drill bit and then stretched it out a little bit and just you know, crazy glued it in there, and that was it. It was done. So that was a nice little effect I thought to add to the finished product. And you know, it's another thing, it looks like a lot, but the whole thing took me about half an hour to do, you know, including the time to figure out how I was going to do it. So really not a big deal, and just added some spare stuff that was sitting around. So nice effect there. I also used a piece of foam to dab in some rust on the exhaust manifold there. I should say the heat shield on the exhaust. And as we come around, one other quick thing I want to point out. This is the winch, and I had pretty well finished everything, and I realized I never added a winch line to cover up the drum of the winch. So I quickly went to fabricate that. And the way you can do that to get a realistic looking thing rather than just a simple piece of thread wrapped around the drum, what I did, I took two of my pieces of my tube styrene. I took 3 lengths of gray sewing thread, and you can use copper wire or a different colored thread, whatever is necessary for the moment. I crazy glued each of the strands to this sheet styrene. I held one end, put the other end in the chuck of an electric drill, slowly ran the drill. That put the winding in there. When I had the winding the way I wanted it, I went back and crazy glued along the length of it, just lightly spread it in, and that set the threads together so they would not separate and unwind. Once that was done, then I went and used my pin drill and drilled a hole up into the drum, glued in the end of the wire, and using my tweezers just threaded it around the drum. And the end that was hanging down, I actually used one of these spare tow hooks that you see on the front of the vehicle as it comes around. Get a look. One of these little guys right here. I had a spare of those, so that became just an attachment to the cable, and I will flip that over in a minute. Probably see a little bit better in reflection. And that was just to add another detail. If you watch the build video that I did for the AMT Plymouth Valiant Scamp, I talked a lot about making sure you don't over detail against things that are under detailed. You know, you want to try to blend all these things together. Now on this kit, it was almost the opposite, where the kit has an incredible amount of detail on it right out of the box, and leaving that drum spool for the winch empty really looked kind of ridiculous. So I really felt compelled to do something with that. But that too, that was a simple little project. 20 minutes, 3 pieces of thread, and you know, it's finished. It's done. I had talked earlier that you could pose these doors open or closed if you wanted to do a diorama. One thing I had forgot to mention, the front wheels on this actually attach on ball joints. So even though the steering will not be functional when you assemble it, you can assemble it with the wheels turned and then glue in the tie rods to match that. So if you have a diorama that you want to build, and maybe the, you know, like your diorama, the truck turned into a spot and stopped, and the driver opened the door and hopped out, you could build it with the wheels turned and the door open. And so there are a lot of options that you can do with this, even beyond just the build. Because I wasn't into doing a diorama, I just built them with wheels straight, and that was it. So it's a great kit, highly recommended. The only caveat to that would be if you are just starting with the hobby, I would not recommend this as a first build. Not just because it has a bit of a higher parts count, but because there are a lot of small parts in there, and even though everything fits together like hand in glove, it does take some patience. You definitely need tweezers, and if you're not accustomed or comfortable yet working with smaller pieces and little fine intricate assemblies, this could drive you up a wall. So with a little bit of experience, if you've built just a handful of kits under your belt, then you'd certainly be ready for tackling a kit like this. And not only is it a great way to get into working with the kit that has a little bit more to it, but if you want to get into military stuff, if you've just been doing like civilian cars and whatnot, great way to get into a different genre of modeling. So I'm going to put down my pointer and take this guy off the turntable so we can see a little bit more of that detail underneath, and bring that up to the camera. One challenge I found with this, and here we will look a little bit more at that cab, this great underbody here, all sorts of nice stuff going on underneath there, all the driveline elements, just all sorts of really great stuff. There's the winch cable that I had just talked about. You can see that's tucked in there. It comes with a nice little set of decals, so you can add those on. Nothing like little tiny print that you really can't read to make a military model really get a little bit of an extra realistic pop. But what I was going to say was, one of the bigger challenges I would say with this kit, and you may have noticed I was handling it rather gingerly, as you move through the build, it is delicate because you have so many small pieces and there is so much going on. So you will have to plan how you pick this up and hold it, or you may find you pop a piece off here and a piece off there. Not that it's a big deal to reattach it, but you know, you want your assembly to be going forward, not backward, and doing repairs. So, but again, that's something with experience. You'll know how to look at what you're building and where to pick it up, how to handle it, and that's all part of the learning experience. So I will wrap this up now. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Got to do a couple of extra things on this that I haven't done or been able to show before, so I hope that's of value for your own building endeavors. And until then, I will be back for a new build. All right, that's that. Fooled you. I let it go around another revolution for another look. Ha ha ha. All right, now, goodbye.